Well, I grew up in a very rock and roll household. My dad was in a band called the Tremolos, and they were a big, successful band in the 60s. So my dad's friends were all, you know, 60s stars like, you know, the Dave D, Dozy, Beaky, Mick and Titch and all those guys, and the Searchers and the Marmalade, and Jerry from Jerry and the Pacemakers is a good mate of my dad's. So, you know, parties at our house were always quite rock and roll. There was always like a bit of a stage and people jamming and stuff like that. And you know, I'd lost count of the times that we would get up in the morning, my brother and sister and I, and there'd be musicians littered across the floor, you know, step over them to get to our cornflakes. So, you know, music was very much a part of our lives. There's a piano in the house, there's guitars propped up in the corners. And I mean, when I was 5, we moved to Nashville because my dad got a record deal over there. So my first real kind of taste of contemporary music at the time was, I grew up with country music. It was Willie Nelson and Johnny Cash and Chris Christopherson and you know, Waylon Jennings, artists like that. So I think maybe I'll at one point make a country album. We'll see how we do. For me, music was always very much part of my blood. I always was gravitated to the piano, actually. That was my first instrument. You know, that still is my favourite instrument. And I really didn't pick up guitar until later on in my teens. I certainly didn't rebel against, you know, what my dad kind of came to me with, which was rock and roll music. And I think, you know, he schooled me on Beatles, Kinks, you know, Stevie Wonder, and I think that kind of got in me, if you know what I mean. So I mean, my first real job, apart from paper round when I was 14 or so, was playing piano in places like this, pubs around this area. You know, pubs and wine bars, and I'd do weddings, funerals, whoever would have me, you know. I never did a funeral. Early on, it was Beatles. It was all Beatles and John Lennon. So like, the White Album is still my favourite record of all time. And I honestly think that if it wasn't for that record, I wouldn't have had that kind of jazz for making music. It was everything to me, you know. It was one of those where I've still got my original, actually it's my dad's original copy of the vinyl, you know, and I'd put like sellotape across all of the edges and put my name on it and stuff. I claimed it, you know. So John Lennon was always a huge influence on me. But as I got a bit older, Prince was the next kind of thing for me that kind of changed everything. You know, Purple Rain, that album, it was just, I mean, he was everything, you know, because not only was he an incredible artist, singer, you know, dancer, producer, writer, but he kind of encapsulated the image, and everything about him was just incredible, you know. I still think there's nobody will ever touch him for the overall, all-round talent. I kind of miss him, like a family member almost. My dad got me piano lessons probably I was about 9, something like that, 8 or 9. And I never liked it because it was all classical and I couldn't really relate to it so much. And I'm dyslexic, which I didn't know at the time, but I have a really hard time reading music, and I have a hard time reading words, to be honest with you. So dots, I still struggle with that. So classical music, you know, in that respect, didn't really work out for me. But I remember my dad, he had a friend come over and to give me a lesson. And he was a boogie woogie piano player, like all this kind of amazing blues and boogie woogie stuff, you know. And I absolutely was enthralled by this guy, you know, this incredible kind of all over the keyboard, you know. And I started learning that kind of music. I wish I had a piano, I could play some now. And that is probably what started me off properly on the piano, you know, the fact that I actually play something like that. And then I started kind of learning a little bit by ear and you know, working out chords to Imagine or whatever was in the charts at the time. I remember working out like Paul Young songs from mid-80s, you know, that kind of stuff. And that's why you know, I ended up playing piano in these bars and stuff. And I think really that's where I learned my craft as a musician, because every night was different. One night would be, you know, everybody around the piano and asking for requests, and I'd be playing Elton John and Billy Joel and Barry Manilow, whatever, you know. And then other nights would be, you know, people kind of minding their own business, and I'd just be in the corner. And I used to bring my dog with me, and he used to sleep at my feet. And you'd just kind of, because you're just background music, you'd end up kind of playing a song and then just disappearing into your own little world and just playing chords and stuff. And, you know, then you'd find your way into another song. And because it was, you know, not, people were listening but not intently listening, you know. And I feel like because you do that for 3 hours every night, and, you know, before long you kind of get to know where you're going on the piano, you know. My first band was a band called Coco, and it was my brother on drums, and he still is my drummer to this day and will be at the festival at the weekend. We had the local vicar's daughter and son on bass and guitar, and my little sister Keely was singing, like, you know, Fleetwood Mac songs, or, you know, Blondie and stuff like that. So my dad would pick the songs. He was like the burgeoning kind of Svengali back then, you know, the Joe Jackson of Berkshire. And he had a little studio at the back of the house, and we would just rehearse there. And I think our first ever gig was at a brownie hut. So that was my first taste of a crowd. Well, Coco kind of split up, and you know, the vicar's son and daughter went their way, and my sister, you know, she wanted to do her own thing, and Jodie and I stuck together, my brother and I. And then we had a couple of bands here and there. I can't remember the names. We had one called Uncle Ernie and the Suspenders once, you know. And there was a guy called Gary Nuttall who was a local guitar player, a friend of ours, and we had a band with him. And Gary stayed with me and us right through all of the kind of success years and everything else. And then after that, he joined Robbie Williams' band, and he's been with Robbie ever since. Hi guys, Chesney Hawkes here. Join me for a weekend with me and a bunch of my mates, including Pat Sharp, on the weekend of the 31st of May. It's going to be limited to about 500 people at Cattows Farm in Leicester. Get your tickets right here on the link below. See you there.